My husband, Alan, is not here by choice. Toward the end of 2011, my husband was diagnosed with both Alzheimer's disease and laryngeal cancer. Ultimately, he decided to voluntarily stop eating and drinking as a peaceful means to the end of his life. Sometimes I'll refer to this as VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking. Alan died just 1 month shy of his 77th birthday, so he is not here by choice. A few weeks before he stopped eating and drinking, he was sitting at the breakfast table. I glanced over at him and I noticed that he was crying. "Honey, what are you feeling?" "I've lived a good life. I'm not afraid of dying. But I want everyone to know about VSED." I spontaneously replied, "You'll just have to trust that I'll be your vehicle." And here I am today, sharing this exact story with you. This didn't happen that long ago. Death is something most of us don't want to think about. It frightens us, and yet it beckons us. And I'm suggesting you take the time now to learn that you have more choices about the end of your life than you may be aware of. If you have this awareness, you may have less fear about dying, and therefore more joy and ease in your life today. I'm going to share my husband's story with you and tell you about the 5 unusual choices he made. Alan was a very special man. I never met anyone who didn't like him. He loved to learn, and he was so curious. He played improvisational jazz piano throughout his life. He was a Harvard graduate, and he worked with computers for his career. We had a wonderful marriage for 26 years. And one of the things that I loved the most about our relationship was our ability to laugh at ourselves and each other. And for many years, rarely did a day go by where we didn't have a deep belly laugh. We were best friends, and we were partners in our own consulting business. For several years, we both noticed subtle cognitive changes in Alan, and eventually, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And only 6 weeks later, he was also diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. The cancer needed immediate attention, and his throat surgeon told him he needed to have a series of 3 invasive surgeries, and that if he didn't do this, he would likely die a painful death within 6 to 12 months. And Alan was told that following the surgeries, it was possible he wouldn't be able to breathe or speak or swallow very well. This was a big decision to make, and we bought into the current medical model, and we scheduled that first surgery. But while we were waiting for the surgery to occur, we had more conversation, and we asked ourselves, is surgery the only choice? And Alan thought carefully about his options, and he made his first unusual choice. There will be no surgery. Instead, he made his second unusual choice: to follow a strict naturopathic healing protocol. I became like a drill sergeant, making sure he took his supplements and followed his procedures from morning until night. And we asked our extended family and friends to send loving thoughts to him every night at 7:30. And a lot of people did this. And then an amazing thing happened. After 4 months, we returned to the throat doctor, and he examined Alan. He could find no cancer. Alan remained cancer-free to the last day of his life. We celebrated this good news with a lot of people who came to hear the details of this miraculous healing. But the joy we felt that night only lasted a short time. because the Alzheimer's became very noticeable and we could no longer deny it. There's a fair amount of Alzheimer's in Alan's family, and his mother had this disease for about 10 years. She died a shadow of a person with no physical capacities. Alan was clear he did not want to experience this. Alan knew that he was declining quickly. He was sleeping at this point at least 16 hours a day. And he made his third unusual choice. He decided he wanted to be at his own funeral. He used to laugh and think it was very funny and backwards that people had their funerals after they died. He wanted to be present to all that love and attention. And so about 6 months before he died, while he could still speak fairly well, we had a beautiful celebration of life. And Alan talked, and I talked, and many people shared their affection with Alan. It was a magnificent celebration. So Alan had his funeral. And he remained certain he didn't want to live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. But what option was left to him? At this point, a friend told us about VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And we learned that in 1990, the United States Supreme Court ruled that anyone has the right to refuse unwanted life-saving medical treatment. And the Supreme Court has asserted time and again, anyone can refuse hydration and nutrition. I did more legal research about all of this, and I shared the information with Alan. This became an option. Then Alan wanted to explore one more choice. He wanted to visit a good dementia facility. We were very fortunate. We had an excellent long-term care insurance policy that would pay for his care. The facility was clean and cheerful. There were no locked doors, and the staff was pleasant. But the faces on the people who lived there were frozen and lifeless. And within a few minutes of our tour, we were both so shaky and crying, we had to sit down. And as soon as we left the facility, Alan turned to me and said, "I will never live there." That was his fourth unusual choice. Alan knew he could continue living for some years. And he also knew that his brain and his mental faculties were diminishing quickly. And so he made his fifth unusual choice. He decided he'd stop eating and drinking so he didn't have to live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. I told him I would support him through this process, even though this was the most difficult thing I ever had to do. I cried often alone and with Alan, anticipating the loss of my best friend. I was in an almost constant state of anxiety, wondering how this would all finally resolve. And as soon as Alan made his decision, people in the community began to hear about it. And some people got uncomfortable, and some people said, "This is wrong." And some of you may be thinking right now, why did he stop eating and drinking? He still had some quality of life left. After all, a lot of people are like this as they age. He could still eat a little, and he could still eat, he could talk a little, he could walk a little. He was mentally competent. Some people asked, is he committing suicide? Is he doing this so Phyllis doesn't have to struggle? But for Alan, this wasn't about right and wrong. This was about self-love and peace and compassion. And once he made his decision, he was in a state of deep, calm, accepting presence. And he spoke these actual words to me. "I am comfortable and at ease with everything. I just feel great all the time, even when I'm tired. I'd like to help people reduce their suffering. People notice how happy I look, and I think that's important because I'm really at the end of this life. I'm sure it goes on. I don't know how to share this with other people. It's up to you, Phyllis, to do that. Community has always been important to both Alan and me. And as we were going through this process, we made our lives public intentionally because we knew we were paving the way for others to make similar choices in the future. And once Alan was no longer with us, people came forward and began to express the profound effect that his choice had on them. People perceived his actions as loving and courageous, as a demonstration of his civil rights. They saw dignity in his death, and many people felt deep relief knowing that this option's available to them someday if necessary. Alan had to be mentally competent in order to stop eating and drinking. We felt he only had a couple of months left before he'd no longer be competent, and therefore wouldn't have the awareness to follow through with his decision. And so he set an exact date as to when to start. It took Alan 9.5 days to be not here by choice. Once he started, he never looked back. He just went to bed and stopped eating and drinking. He remained quiet and asked for very little. He didn't complain nor say he was hungry. To satisfy his thirst, we gave him moist swabs and sprayed mists of water into his mouth until he was satisfied. He had a good doctor and 24-hour caregivers who kept him physically comfortable. And for as long as he could, he thanked all of the people around him for the good care he was receiving. Thank you. He said, thank you. Thank you. And when Alan could no longer open his eyes or speak, I wanted to make sure that he was free of suffering. And so I got very close to him at his bedside and I said, Alan, I am here with you. If you are comfortable, blink your eyes. And with his eyes closed, he could move his eyelids, and I knew he was all right. And while he was in this state, he was able to mouth his last words to me by moving his lips. I love you. On the 9th day, Alan was in a deep coma with loud, rapid breathing. And the doctor estimated he would live another 1 to 3 days. His heart was still strong. But I felt he was really no longer with us. And I wanted to help him leave his body. I wanted to help him release himself, but I wasn't sure what to do. And I went and I just stood by him and I just waited. And then it came to me. And with a great deal of presence, I began to do therapeutic touch, which is a healing modality that I learned from nurses many years ago. And then I began to talk to Alan. Sweetheart, I am here with you. We have partnered together for 26 years. We have shared everything together. And I am here with you now to say your work is done. You have been so courageous, and I'm proud of you. You can let go now. You can release yourself. I want you to know I'm going to be all right. Alan, I love you. I'm going to help usher you home. I'm going to midwife you home. Instead of having that quick, loud breathing while I was talking to Alan, his breath quickly shifted to a very gentle breath, like, and he just took a few more of those gentle breaths that were so quiet that I couldn't even detect his last breath. And instead of it taking another 1 to 3 days, he left his body in 15 minutes. Every step of the way, Alan made his choices. He chose not to have surgery. He chose naturopathic healing. He chose to be at his own funeral. He chose not to live in a dementia facility. And he chose to stop eating and drinking so he didn't have to live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. And his final decision to be not here by choice brought him great peace. What will you do if you get a dreadful disease? You have legal rights and choices. Your choices may be different than the ones that Alan made. But it is my wish for you that you are empowered to participate in the planning of your own death so that you can have the same kind of peace that my husband experienced. I miss my husband very much, but I'm glad he didn't have to suffer and live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. My support of my husband through his process of dying peacefully and consciously was my biggest act of love. Thank you very much.